You're 4 years old, and you've just knocked a glass off the counter. It's on the floor in pieces. Your mother walks in, and before you've even decided to do it, before you've thought it through, the words are already out. I didn't do it. Nobody taught you that sentence. Nobody sat you down and gave you a lesson in deception. It just arrived the moment you needed it. Right now, somewhere in your life, there's a version of that same reflex running quietly in the background. A white lie to a coworker. A fine when you're not fine. A smile held a half-second too long. You do it so often you barely register it as a decision anymore. So here's the real question. When did this start? Not you, personally. The species. When did a human being first open their mouth and say something they knew wasn't true? The honest answer is that nobody can point to a date. Lies don't fossilize. But researchers have spent decades tracking the pieces that lying is built from. And those pieces do leave a trail, in laboratories, in the forests of Tanzania, and in a cave on the coast of South Africa. So where do you even start looking for the birth of the lie? Start with the deceivers who came before language existed at all. In the 1960s and 70s, the primatologist Jane Goodall spent years at Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania, watching a young chimpanzee named Figan. Figan would find a hidden stash of food, then deliberately lead the rest of the group away from it, only to slip back alone once the others had lost interest, and eat undisturbed. That's not an accident. That's a chimpanzee modeling what other minds believe and steering them toward a false belief on purpose. Researchers Richard Byrne and Andrew Whiten at the University of St. Andrews later formalized this. Their 1990 catalog collected documented cases of what they called tactical deception across the primate order, and the numbers weren't evenly spread. Chimpanzees and baboons accounted for the overwhelming majority of confirmed cases, while other primate groups showed almost none. Deception, it turned out, tracked with brain power, not just opportunity. So if the raw ingredient for lying existed millions of years before humans did, what was actually missing? Here's where it gets strange. The ingredient wasn't intelligence. It was symbols, the ability to make one thing stand for another, on purpose, for someone else to interpret. And there's a place scientists point to for the earliest hard evidence of that. Blombos Cave, on South Africa's southern coast. In 2002, the archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood and his team published findings on 2 pieces of ochre pulled from the cave, deliberately engraved with cross-hatched geometric lines. Dated to roughly 77,000 years old, they represent some of the earliest known evidence that early modern humans were creating marks meant to carry meaning beyond themselves. A scratch on a rock is worthless for survival. It doesn't feed you or keep you warm. Its only function is to say something to somebody else, which means the machinery for symbolic communication, the same machinery a lie needs to operate, was already running tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote a word down. Everyone assumes lying is something children have to learn, the way they learn to tie their shoes or say please. The data says the opposite. Lying isn't taught, it's scheduled. The psychologist Kong Lee at the University of Toronto has spent over 2 decades running experiments on exactly when this switch flips. In one of his best-known setups, children were told not to peek at a toy while the researcher briefly left the room. Around 30% of 2-year-olds who peeked lied about it afterward. By age 3, that number climbed to roughly 50%. By 4, it was around 80%. By 7 or 8, it was nearly universal. The lie doesn't arrive with vocabulary or with moral instruction. It arrives on a biological clock, right alongside the child's growing ability to understand that other people's minds hold different information than their own. So the child isn't corrupted into lying. The child is simply, finally, cognitively equipped to do it. That switch never turns back off. In 1996, the psychologist Bella DePaulo at the University of Virginia had 147 adults keep detailed diaries of every social interaction over a full week, logging every lie they told. College students in the study reported telling an average of 2 lies a day. Community adults reported roughly 1. Across both groups, people lied in about 1 out of every 5 conversations that lasted 10 minutes or more. Most of those lies weren't dramatic. They were small, forgettable, self-protective, the social equivalent of breathing. Here's the turn, the part that changes what this whole search has actually been about. It's tempting to treat lying as a flaw in the species, a glitch that honest people are just better at suppressing. But look at what the evidence actually lines up to show. Tactical deception in the primate lineage, symbolic engraving at Blombos 77,000 years ago, and a developmental clock in every human child that reliably starts ticking around age 2. None of that describes a bug. It describes a tool, one that shows up exactly when a mind becomes complex enough to model another mind and needs a way to manage it. The real answer to the big question isn't a date on a timeline. It's a threshold. Lying didn't begin the day someone invented it. It began the moment a mind became social enough that it needed to. So go back to that 4-year-old, standing over the broken glass, already saying the words before the decision to say them had fully formed. That reflex wasn't a failure of character. It was proof of arrival, proof that a young brain had just crossed the same threshold every human brain crosses. The one Fagan crossed in a Tanzanian forest with a hidden pile of food. The one some nameless person at Blombos crossed with a piece of ochre and a stone tool. You didn't inherit lying as a corruption of honesty. You inherited it as evidence that you were finally, fully, dangerously capable of understanding another mind. The species didn't learn to lie. It grew a mind that couldn't stop. You already lie once or twice a day and don't notice it. This video traces that reflex back as far as the evidence goes. From a chimpanzee in Tanzania who learned to fake out his own troop, to a 77,000-year-old scratch on a rock in South Africa, to the exact age your brain first learned to say, "I didn't do it." Turns out lying isn't a character flaw. It's a threshold every complex social mind eventually crosses.